Professor Hossein Nassaji. Hello, Professor Hossein.
Hello.
Hello, Namaste from India.
Hello, nice to
Hello.
see you.
Yeah. So I'm Srikant Patnaik from India.
Okay, very nice to meet you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So for the first time we are seeing you. I welcome you to this August gathering. The conference has started 1 hour before. Let me briefly tell you about the proceedings. This is the second time we are organizing this conference on educational technology and administration. Last time it was Fred Pass was there as a speaker, and later on we have requested to be one of the chair. And professors from Australia, Professor L.C. Jain, Lakshmi Jain has joined, and due to the late night, he has already quit the meeting. And other professors from Hong Kong and other areas, Australia, last time they have joined. This time, some of them are joining. And we are very fortunate to have you with us. Let me formally introduce you to the August gathering. Here is Professor Hossein Nassaji, Professor of Applied Linguistics in the Department of Linguistic, University of Victoria, Canada. He has published numerous articles in leading journals, including Applied Linguistics, Applied Psycholinguistics, Language Learning, Modern Language Journal, TESOL Quarterly, Reading Research Quarterly, Language Teaching Research, and his recent books include International Feedback Dimension in Instructed Second Language Learning. It is published in 2015 from Bloomsbury Publishing House. Perspectives on Language as Action, published in 2019 from Multilingual Matters with H. Haneda, and Corrective Feedback in Second Language Teaching and Learning in 2017 from Routledge with E. Kartchava. His recent book is the Cambridge Handbook on Corrective Feedback in Language Learning and Teaching from Cambridge University Press. He is the editor-in-chief and co-editor of Language Teaching Research, a leading journal in the field of language pedagogy. He is a recipient of many awards and prizes for outstanding research, such as the Modern Language Association of America's Mildenberger Prize and the University of Victoria Faculty of Humanities Research Excellence Award. He is a Fellow of Royal Society of Canada, the highest academic honor for the country's distinguished scholar and leaders. With this, I introduce Professor Hossein Nassaji to the gathering, and I now invite you to deliver your keynote address. Professor Nassaji.
Okay, thank you very much for this kind introduction. I just wanted to know if I should or if I could share my screen.
Yeah, I'm requesting the coordinator, Mr. Bin Hu, to pass on the host power to Professor Nassaji.
Now, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. What I'm going to talk about tonight is about interactional feedback in synchronous computer-mediated communication. So it's kind of like a classroom technique that is used in the classroom, and also for language teaching and learning technique that is used in the classroom and also in computer-mediated situations. So I want to see how I could go to my, okay. Just trying to. So this is a definition of interactional feedback exchange. An interactional feedback exchange is when the teacher is talking to students through communicative interaction, and then the teacher would say something, and then the student would respond. And when the student has error in the utterance, then the teacher would provide feedback communicatively through interaction. For example, here the teacher is talking to student, and the teacher says, "What did you do on the weekend?" And then the student says, "I watch a movie." As we can see, there is an error in here, "I watch a movie." And then it has acted as a trigger, and then the teacher would correct it by saying, "You watched a movie." And then the student corrects the error by saying, "I watched a movie," which we say learner response, so we call it uptake. Corrective feedback has been of interest, or interactional feedback, to teachers and researchers. It is of interest to teachers, language teachers, because they can use that as a source of correcting learner errors. And it is also a good of interest to researchers because they use it as a means of investigating the role that negative and positive evidence plays in second language acquisition. In this talk, I will talk about some of the key issues and controversies surrounding interactional feedback. And then I will examine some of the current research in this area, particularly in synchronous communicative CMC, computer-mediated communication. And then I will discuss some of the insights that we have been able to gain from that. So there are three questions or controversies in the field about interactional feedback. The first one is, does interactional feedback assist L2 acquisition? The second one is, what type of feedback is most effective? And the third one is, how does feedback assist acquisition? There are conflicting theoretical and pedagogical positions on these questions, and there are a number of opposing views in particular and arguments against corrective feedback. I think I should again say that by corrective feedback, we mean the kind of correction provided by the teacher during communicative interaction in response to learners' errors or erroneous utterances. One argument against the provision of corrective feedback in language teaching is that there is limited provision of explicit negative feedback in child first language learning. And the idea here is that child and second language learning are the same, or probably are very similar. And then the conclusion is that if there is no provision of explicit corrective feedback in first language acquisition, then it should not be in second language acquisition. And even if there might be some, it is unhelpful. So that is an argument against corrective feedback. For example, here there is a piece of evidence usually used in response in that argument against corrective feedback. The child would say, "Nobody don't like me." The mother says, "No, say nobody likes me." And then the child again repeats the same error. "Nobody don't like me." So this exchange continues for several times. And then the mother would say, "No, now listen carefully. Say nobody likes me." And then the child would say, "Nobody don't likes me." So the child is not correcting himself or herself after so many rounds of correction. Another argument comes from nativists who argue they are a school of thought in language acquisition, arguing that learning mainly takes place through exposure to the language, and learners do not need any correction. The argument is that what drives language acquisition is some biologically innate linguistic principles, which is called universal grammar. For example, Chomsky argues or has argued that people are equipped with what he calls a language acquisition device, which is like a machine, and it's inborn. People are born with it. And when people are exposed to language, then they acquire the language. Therefore, they do not need any correction. Chomsky was arguing in the context of first language acquisition. However, there are a number of L2 researchers who have extended this framework to L2 learning. And they argue that if that is the case in L1 learning, that would be the case in L2 learning as well. For example, Cook 2001, who is an L2 researcher, has argued that as the universal grammar in the student's mind is so powerful, there is comparatively little for the teachers to do. In other words, he's arguing that because people are equipped with the universal grammar, when they are exposed to language, they learn that, and they do not need any correction. Interactionists, on the other hand, have argued that corrective feedback or negative feedback exists in interactions between parents and children. And also it exists when native speakers and non-native speakers interact. Therefore, it plays a very important role in language learning. So this is the example that they use. Child would says, "Mommy home." The mother would say, "Yes, mommy is home." So the child is correcting the mother is correcting the child. Or for example, the child says, "Want juice?" And mother would say, "Yes, I want more apple juice, please." So again, here, the mother is correcting the child. Cognitivists argue that learning on L2 is like other kinds of learning, driven by our general cognitive processes. Feedback is crucial as it helps learners to form a correct mental representation of the target language. Therefore, feedback is essential because it facilitates noticing and attention to language forms. So from this perspective, corrective feedback is needed. There are also conflicting pedagogical positions related to feedback. We have what's called a natural approach to language teaching. This approach argues that there are predetermined sequences of acquisition. So everyone learning a language, they learn it in a predetermined way. And this predetermined way of learning a language is not much affected by corrective feedback. Therefore, correction is not necessary. It could also be detrimental because correction would interrupt the learning process, and also correction would interrupt the flow of communication. The audiolingual method, which is another approach to language teaching, is based on behaviorism and argues that errors are bad habits. They are sin and they should not be tolerated. Therefore, this language teaching method argues that corrective feedback is essential for eradicating the errors. Communicative language teaching, on the other hand, argues that the goal of language instruction is the development of communicative competence. Teaching should be primarily meaning-focused. Therefore, corrective feedback interrupts the communication process. So that is an argument against corrective feedback. People have also talked about the psychological side effects of corrective feedback. For example, Krashen has argued, who is an influential second language acquisition researcher, has argued that corrective feedback is a serious mistake. He argues that error correction has the immediate effect of putting the students on the defense. It encourages a strategy in which students will try to avoid mistakes, avoid difficult construction, focus on meaning, less focus on meaning, and more focus on form. Truscott, another researcher, has also argued for the psychological side effects of correction. He has argued that correction would lead to embarrassment, anger, inhibition, and therefore it is detrimental. However, current SLA or second language acquisition research is showing that L2 language learners, particularly adults, cannot develop native-like accuracy on the basis of mere exposure to language. Therefore, corrective feedback is needed in order to acquire an L2 or a second language successfully. In particular, this research has shown that it is possible to provide corrective feedback without interrupting the flow of communication, and that is through interactional feedback, which is a kind of feedback that learners receive during conversation or interaction. It is on this part, and it happens when learners and teachers, or learners and learners, or learners or a native speaker would communicate with each other. Thus, this could be considered as an option for language teaching classrooms because the focus is on communicating meaning. A growing body of research has provided increasing evidence that interactional feedback is beneficial for L2 acquisition, and there are a number of reviews and meta-analysis attesting to this positive effect of interactional feedback. For example, Russell and Spada, 2006, conducted a meta-analysis of 15 studies, and they found a strong effect for corrective feedback. Meta-analysis are analysis of a group of studies. They are statistical analysis of statistical studies, and they put together and summarize a group of studies. Mackie and Gu also conducted another meta-analysis of 28 interactional studies, and they found a medium effect in immediate post-test and large effects in delayed post-test for interactional feedback. Lister and Saito conducted another 15 classroom-based studies, or analyzed and summarized through meta-analysis another 15 classroom-based studies and found a significant and durable effect. So what are this research that we have just reviewed shows that interactional feedback assists language acquisition, but there are different types of interactional feedback. So the next question would be, does that effect depend on the type of feedback? There are different types of interactional feedback, which I will go over them very quickly. The first one is recast. So one of them is recast. Recast is when the teacher or an interlocutor would correct the error through communication by correcting or rephrasing the erroneous form while the focus is on meaning. For example, here, the student says she put the book in box, so the teacher would rephrase the error in a correct form by saying, teacher, oh, she put them in a box. So clarification request is another kind. That is when the teacher is just asking for clarification, but that clarification might provide a kind of may serve as a kind of correction for the learner. For example, the student would say, I want practice today, and the teacher would say, I'm sorry. So there is a possibility here that by hearing I'm sorry, the student might correct himself or herself. Repetition could be another kind of correction. When, for example, here is an example, student would say, the lesson was bored, there is an error here, and the teacher can just say the error with a rising intonation, bored, and this might also provide a hint to the learner, and the learner might self-correct himself or herself. Elicitation is another type of interactional feedback, and that is an example. The student would say, when she arrived, and the teacher would repeat the sentence up to the error, and then waits for the learner to correct the error. For example, when she arrived, the teacher would say, when she, and waiting for the learner to complete and then correct. And we also have metalinguistic feedback. Metalinguistic feedback is when the teacher or an interlocutor uses a metalinguistic term such as past tense, present tense, passive voice, and so on. For example, in this example, I see him in the office yesterday. The teacher would say, you need a past tense. Of course, the teacher is not correcting the learner, but using a metalinguistic hint, which is you need a past tense. And then finally, we have direct correction, when the teacher or an interlocutor overtly and directly corrects an error. For example, the student has said he catch a cold, and the teacher would say not catch, caught. So that is a direct correction. So which type of feedback is most effective? This is a very controversial question because there are arguments both against and for which type of feedback is effective. But now we are moving to the studies that have been comparing face-to-face with computer-mediated feedback, and in particular, synchronous communication.
Professor, your microphone is off. Professor Hossein, your microphone is off.
Is that on now?
Yes.
So we were talking about studies that have compared face-to-face interaction with computer-mediated feedback in computer-mediated communication, and in particular in synchronous computer-mediated communication. And these studies have found interesting results. For example, studies that have compared a tutor and also a learner have found a very positive and significant effect for recast in online versus face-to-face communication. This is one of the studies, for example, Yilmaz and Yüksel, that found a positive effect of online recasting on plural and locative morphemes. Online recast led to higher level of oral development. These studies have also shown that task complexity might mediate the effect of online or computer-mediated feedback. For example, Barrel, 2013, found that task complexity played an important role in mediating the effect of online feedback when learners receive recasts in either face-to-face or online on Spanish past subjunctive. The researcher found that recast promoted the highest level of development when delivered online, but only when the task was less complex. Studies that have compared synchronous computer-mediated communication in learner-learner interaction, they have found inconsistent findings. For example, these two first studies compared face-to-face and SCMC in group activities and showed that SCMC produced higher proficiency gains. Whereas these two later studies, Abrams and Cost, they found similar proficiency gains in the two conditions. However, De La Fonte, 2003, found a greater effect for face-to-face communication. when compared to online communication. Studies that have compared the quality of interaction and production have found also very interesting results. For example, a number of studies have found that face-to-face interaction yields higher level of negotiated interaction and amount of production. For example, these two studies, Ruchat and Zheng, found a greater amount of words or morphemes in face-to-face communication than in SCMC communication. Lei and Zhao found a higher degree of negotiation in face-to-face than in SCMC. So when it comes to interaction and the rate of production, face-to-face has been more effective or productive than computer-mediated interaction. Studies have also shown that face-to-face interaction may produce longer utterances. SCMC may produce shorter but more syntactically complex and more sophisticated uses of the structure. So that is an advantage of SCMC when it comes to complexity or complex language use. A series of meta-analyses, again, on interactional or corrective feedback have shown that computer-mediated feedback, comparing computer-mediated feedback with classroom feedback, have shown that computer-mediated feedback creates more benefit for learners than feedback in the classroom. The study that I conducted with Yusufi on pragmatics, we compared computer-mediated feedback on pragmatics with face-to-face feedback, and we found that computer-mediated feedback created more effects than face-to-face when learners received feedback on pragmatics. Recast, which is a kind of implicit feedback, like when the parents corrects the learner errors during communication, is generally considered implicit, but this type of feedback has been shown to become effective when it is stressed, or when it is short, or when the sentence contains fewer changes, because that is easier to notice. When feedback is provided intensively on a single form, studies have shown that it would be more effective when the feedback is provided extensively on a wide range of forms, which suggests then to teachers that if they want the feedback to be effective, it might be good to select or isolate specific errors and then provide the feedback on those rather than providing feedback on a variety of forms. In general, research has shown that feedback, when it is explicit, it's more effective than when it is implicit on both immediate and short delayed post-test. And in computer-mediated feedback on L2 pragmatics, we found again that explicit feedback created more effect than implicit feedback. Feedback has been shown to be the effective feedback has been shown to be mediated by the complexity of the target structure. Explicit and implicit feedback, the effect of those depends on the type of target structure. When the target structure is easier, maybe implicit feedback might be effective. But when the target structure becomes more complex, learners should receive more explicit feedback. Now, we were just reviewing some of the studies comparing face-to-face interaction with online or computer-mediated feedback, and we found interesting and positive effects, and sometimes more benefits than face-to-face coming from online. And we wanted now to discuss what could be the reasons why SCMC would produce more effects. One reason is that SCMC might lead to greater levels of noticing. Studies have shown that for feedback to be effective, students must notice it as corrective feedback, or students must pay attention to that. So that could be one of the reasons for the more effectiveness of SCMC, because when students receive feedback through computer, they might have more time to process it, and therefore they might notice it more effectively. Another reason might be time on task. When students receive feedback through SCMC, for example, through chat tools or through written SCMC communication, they might spend more time on task. And studies have shown that time on task would be a factor in making the feedback more effective. So SCMC might lead to more time on task, and that could be another reason. Another reason could be the opportunities that are created for focus on language forms. Research has shown that for a task to be effective, it should provide opportunities for focus on form. It seems that SCMC does so, as studies have found that SCMC's interaction promote more accuracy than face-to-face interaction. Another reason could be the explicitness of feedback and focus on form. As we just reviewed, studies have shown that in general, explicit feedback is more effective than implicit feedback. SCMC has found to lead to more explicit feedback than implicit feedback. So that could be another reason why computer-mediated interaction is more effective when it comes to feedback. So that was just a very brief overview of the effectiveness of interactional feedback, the kind of feedback that is provided during communication, and some studies comparing face-to-face and SCMC. I just wanted now to show you some resources that if you are or you have become interested in following up on the role of communicative feedback or interactional feedback, I have here for you some books that if you are interested, if you are teachers and wanted to read more on those, I think these books could be very beneficial. One is a book on teacher grammar in second language classrooms that we did with Routledge in 2015. And it talks about how to provide or how to teach grammar and how to provide feedback in communicative classrooms. This is a book that the whole book is about interactional feedback. It's a 2015 book, the Interactional Feedback Dimension in Instructed Second Language Learning. And it talks about all kinds of interactional feedback and the different contexts in which it can be used and the effectiveness of this type of feedback in all these different contexts. That's another book by published by Routledge, Corrective Feedback in Second Language Teaching and Learning. If you're interested in correction or error correction, then that would be a very helpful book that you can use as a reference or as and read it if you are interested in learning about feedback. That's another book on form focus instruction, 2007, that was published by Oxford University Press. And just recently, 2021, we have published a book by Cambridge University Press, the Cambridge Handbook of Corrective Feedback in Second Language Learning and Teaching. That's a very voluminous book, many chapters on various topics related to feedback, written feedback, oral feedback, computer-mediated feedback, nonverbal feedback in various contexts with various learners on various language, target language structures, and that could be a very helpful reference as well. So I just wanted to thank you for listening to this presentation. So if there are any questions, then I would be happy to take them now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hossein. It was an excellent talk on computer-mediated learning and computer-mediated feedback, how it can be used, although we are designing and we are developing as a computer engineer, but you have, say, analyzed where we fall and where we should improve. It was a nice talk.